Hello, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Left Brain Professionals. I'm Steve Bressler, and I'll be your host moderator today. If you need help at any time, you can email us at support@leftbrainpro.com or use the chat function within the Flow platform. Let's go over a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is hosted on the Flow platform. You should see a small toolbar with 4 icons in the upper right-hand corner of your browser window. The first button will mute the audio. The second button will put the webinar in full screen mode. Third button enables the chat and the Q&A, and the fourth button enables the settings. Please enter your content questions in the Q&A panel at any time during the presentation. We'll address as many questions as we can and use the chat feature to chat with hosts, presenters, and other attendees. Please do not enter your content questions in the chat panel. They may get lost among other conversations. And if you have connection or audio issues, please try the following potential solutions. Make sure your VPN is turned off. Test your system with the links provided. Exit and re-enter the event. Potentially try using a different browser. Chrome and Edge have worked pretty reliably in the past. Connect from your personal PC, phone, or tablet. Contact the Flow support, or confirm in the gear settings that your microphone and camera are identified. In order to receive credit for today's presentation, you must respond to 3 of the 4 polling questions. Certificates are generated automatically and will be emailed within 48 hours after completion of the webinar. A survey will display in your web browser at the end of today's webinar. Please take a few moments to answer the questions and provide any feedback. The recording of today's presentation will be available on our YouTube channel, and the link will be included in a follow-up email. So thank you for your attention, and without further delay, I'll turn it over to Robert for today's content.
All right, well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us again. I know many of you are repeat attendees, and we certainly do appreciate that. Our topic for today is labor categories for government contractors. Just really briefly, if you don't know about us, if you happen to be new, Left Brain Professionals, I describe us as being a boutique accounting firm and that we work only with government contractors. We practice primarily accounting system design, implementation, and audit support. We do a lot of work with DCAA audits, the incurred cost proposal. We also offer outsourced accounting, CFO, and controller services. All 3 of us are on today's call. Steve, as he said, is your moderator today, and Suzanne will likely chime in as we go throughout some of our content. Our learning objectives: at the end of our time together, you should be able to describe the characteristics of labor categories, list ways to perform salary surveys, explain the billing compliance of labor categories, and define the labor category matrix. All right, our first polling question here. Let me get kicked off. And this is really just to gauge where everybody is as we start.
All right, I'll go ahead and read.
I think we lost Steve's audio there. I'm not sure what happened, but hopefully he'll come back. What percentage of your contracts have defined labor categories? No right or wrong answer here, just trying to gauge and see where people are. Looks like we've got about most people participating. We're going to give you just a few more seconds here, and we will stop this. As a reminder, you do need to participate in 3 of the 4 polling questions in order to get credit for today's webinar. And we'll close it out in 5, 4, 3, 2 and 1. All right, let me go back to my slides here. All right, let's talk about labor categories and the characteristics of them. Labor categories are defined really in terms of 3 qualifications: education, experience, and certification. I've got some sample labor categories from a recent RFP that I found that I'm going to share to show you some examples. In some of those, you will see that obviously the labor categories will talk about these 3 things, again, education, experience, and certification, but they also often include very specific task experience or task requirements are in there. The note at the bottom of the slide is really important. Employees must meet the minimum qualifications in order to qualify for the labor category, or they need to be assigned another category. I'm going to give you an example of an extreme scenario that I encountered a few years ago. Typically don't see them quite this extreme, but we do see issues from time to time. So had a client a few years ago. They had an individual who had worked in the military, had all of the requisite experience, was very knowledgeable, was very thorough, very good at his job, but he did not have a bachelor's, did not have a college education. He did not actually have a college degree, and he did not have the certification. He knew how to do all of the work, super intelligent guy, but did not have a college degree, did not have a certification. Now, where this became a particular issue for them was in their contracts that had very defined labor categories. So those contracts that were fixed price, that they had a little more freedom and flexibility in how they staffed them and how they billed them, not so much of an issue, like we'll talk about here in a few moments. But in the case of, in their particular case, they had some cost type contracts that had defined labor categories. And this individual did not meet those requirements. And so they ended up having to bill him at a much lower category. So the category that they billed, unfortunately, so this is somebody that at the time they were probably paying $125,000 a year as a salary, probably otherwise billing this person out at $200 an hour or more. But because he did not meet those requirements, they ended up having to bill him out as a word processing specialist, because on the contract's the only category that he otherwise fit into. And they were actually billing him less than what they were paying him on an hourly rate. And so that was you can see in that particular situation, that was a problem. Now, luckily for them, he didn't work much on these particular contracts, so it didn't have a huge impact. But obviously, you don't want to be in a situation where you have employees who don't meet the labor categories, right? So that's, again, a bit of an extreme example. Note that education is often listed as a type of degree. For example, they might say that you have to have an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. They may identify specific fields. They might say something like you have to have a bachelor's in electrical engineering. Oftentimes, that can be satisfied through a certain number of years of experience. But again, this is going to be on a contract by contract basis. And that's probably one of the very important things that you need to understand, is that this is not tied to how you identify things internally. And we're going to talk about that when we get to your labor category matrix. But you have to look on a contract by contract basis what the requirements are and if there are any substitutions. You might have a contract that offers substitutions or a certain type of substitution, and that may not be unilateral across other contract types. So just check those types of things. Experience is, again, typically listed in terms of number of years. There may be a substitute for having a degree. For example, you might have something that says, they have to have a degree plus a certain number of years of experience. Some of the years of experience may be offset by a degree or vice versa. Okay, but again, read the details on that contract by contract basis. And then the third piece that I mentioned was certification. In the particular example, that extreme example that I used in the opening, that was a company that was providing technical services. Specifically, they were doing network kind of stuff. And one of the requirements, and I forget exactly for that particular contract, but they had to be like a certified Cisco engineer or network engineer or something like that. Again, the individual had all of the knowledge and had experience, had a number of years of experience, but did not actually have the certification. Okay. So make sure that you know what the certification is. And as I've said before, be sure to read that alternate language as it does vary from contract to contract. Now, I promised you a couple of examples here, so I want to show you. I think I've got 4 potential examples. Don't want to dwell on these too much, but for example, you'll see at the top, so we've got a title of program manager. We've got a few sentences kind of describing the types of tasks or duties. So it says, right, duties include monitoring and controlling project costs and quality control, assigning personnel consistent with contract requirements, right? So right here, they've got a labor category that's saying, hey, this program manager has got to be managing the people within the contract with the appropriate requirements, right? Understanding and assuring compliance, et cetera, et cetera. But those bullets or the numbers at the bottom, right? So notes that they have to have an undergraduate degree or higher in management, engineering, or science. They have to have 10 years of experience managing or overseeing large task order contracts involving multiple concurrent projects at multiple locations. 6 years of which was as a senior manager or engineer working with environmental restoration projects, and professional registration or licensing in the appropriate discipline, right? So, for example, if you've got a program manager over engineering, then they need to be a registered or a licensed engineer within this. Our next example, quality control manager. Again, we see a short description at the top. The undergraduate degree, 5 years of quality control experience, and 5 years of experience in implementing the Uniform Federal Policy for Quality Assurance Project Plan. Again, very specific requirements here. So what do you do if you have somebody who maybe is, that you might call a quality control manager? Maybe they've got a lot of other experience, but they don't have that last piece of the 5 years of experience on that specific Uniform Federal Policy. Well, if they don't have that specific experience, then they don't qualify for this labor category. Now, I didn't put all of the labor categories from this particular solicitation. This is a recent one that I did find on sam.gov. If anybody's interested, I can send you the link to it out of curiosity. So again, you would have to go through that contract and determine, okay, I've got an individual, they don't meet this category where I think I would put them. Is there another labor category that they do qualify for? Now, the other piece would obviously be if you're reviewing this and you've got somebody who doesn't meet that labor category, then you might need to go back and ask, the contracting officer, can they add a labor category, right? They obviously may not want to modify the particular labor category, but they might be able and willing to add a labor category so that you can properly map somebody to a labor category. The third example here, again, just another so that you can see. Notice that certification under number 6, right? And so under number 6, they've got a specific hygiene certification, industrial hygiene certification. Do see a question over here from David saying, what happens if they write number 3 as preferred and not required? Well, then again, then it is preferred, right? So you can have somebody, if it's preferred, then it's not a requirement, right? Then somebody might actually meet, that criteria. So let me back up and won't apply to any of these, right? But it says the This one doesn't say preferred, it's implied. Well, actually up above it says shall have as a minimum these three things, right? And number 3 says 5 years of experience. So what do you do if you've got somebody with 4 years of experience or 3 years of experience? Maybe they've got experience with that particular quality assurance project plan, but they don't have the minimum 5 years experience. Then they don't qualify and you can't use them. Again, either look at mapping them to another labor category or contact the contracting officer to see if another labor category can be added to the contract. Now, I will say it is also possible that the contracting officer, in conjunction with the technical team on their side, may be willing to modify a labor category. Certainly worth asking that question. Now, I want to go to the 4th example. This was one, the reason I'm putting this up here is that as I was looking for some examples for you, this particular one had labor categories called out, but it didn't actually meet, you'll see that it's structured a little differently than the others, right? So here are the others, has the degree, has the experience, has the education, the experience, and the certification. This one is not laid out like that. Now, it does have some very specific requirements, but it's interesting, and I read through, I only grabbed one particular labor category from this solicitation, but I did see, as I was looking at other labor categories on this one, that they were all structured like this. They did not identify, in particular, they did not identify specific education requirements. They identified very specific experience requirements, but not any education or certification requirements. So what would you do in that situation? Then again, I would say you're going to have to read through here and say, okay, even though it doesn't identify, specific education requirements, I'm going to have to make sure that my people do meet the experience requirements. And note here that there are multiple experience requirements, and this was only a subset of one of the examples. Now, the other thing that's probably most problematic, and we'll highlight this again near the end of today's webinar when we get into the matrix, an engineer 1 is not an engineer 1 is not an engineer 1. Unfortunately, one of the most difficult things when it comes to labor categories in federal government contracts is that we do not have any standardized labor categories. Now, you might hear what you think are standardized titles, right? So we'll often see engineer 1, engineer 2, or we might see senior systems engineer, junior systems engineer, and we might look internally as we're trying to prepare a bid or maybe assign an employee after award, and we might see again a similar title, and we might think, oh, well, the contract says senior systems engineer. I've got somebody who's a senior engineer, so I'm going to go ahead and assign them to that. We got to be careful. We can't just say, well, we have the same title, or we have a title that's very similar or close, so they must be the same. That's not true at all. And in fact, those of you who have any experience with this will know that when you look up senior systems engineer on one contract versus another, the requirements can be very different. That's also, again, makes mapping of employees to the contract very difficult. It can make determining price very difficult, because as you do some analysis that we'll talk about later, when you do that and you're looking what others are charging or what other contracts were awarded for a price, you have to make sure that you're doing an apples to apples comparison and looking into those details and not just looking at the top level title. All right, we've got another polling question here. So let me launch number 2. There we go.
Okay, hopefully my microphone has resumed. Which of the following is not a factor in defining labor categories? Certification, salary, experience, or education? We'll give you about 30 seconds to get those polls submitted.
And I'm going to answer Cheryl's question here. I see, can time spent on internships be counted towards experience? Excellent question. I would say probably yes. Again, read the job descriptions. Somebody may specifically include or exclude that, but I would say if it's documented experience on an internship, it's probably counted towards experience. All right, I think we can close this poll. And the correct answer here was salary, right? And when we were talking about defining labor categories, I said that they were defined by certification, experience, and education. I did not say salary. And you do have to be careful. Again, we've bumped into this at times with some clients who try to put somebody into a labor category based upon what they make, because sometimes they have some overpaid employees. And so they try to put them into another labor category so they can bill them at a higher rate. What you pay somebody is irrelevant when it comes to mapping them to the proper labor category. Okay. So yes, you might end up overpaying somebody because maybe you're paying for years of experience. Maybe you're paying because we're trying to attract and retain a specific individual. There can be some other factors that come into what you pay somebody, but that has nothing to do with how we categorize them into a labor category. All right, let me go back to my slides. All right, let's talk a little bit about labor category billing compliance. I hinted at this earlier. Generally, we can only invoice only the proposed and approved labor categories. Basically, we got to make sure that we don't do any kind of bait and switch, or that we're not using unapproved or unqualified labor categories, right? So we can't go in and say, hey, we propose this at these rates. Now I'm going to execute the work and I'm going to put some lower paid people on there so that, I can make more money. Very touchy situation. So let's talk about that kind of in terms of contract type. So in a fixed price contract, you typically have it's the most flexible because again, you're delivering a product or a service. It's priced as a whole. You're typically not delivering individual labor hours. Though I do want to point out, you could have a fixed price level of effort contract. And in that case, that level of effort might say you will provide X number of hours or Y number of days of a specific labor category, and that labor category may be clearly defined. So my caution to you is that anytime you have an RFP or an award that has clearly defined labor categories, then that should be the warning to you that you can only use and bill those labor categories regardless of contract type. In many fixed price contracts, the government is buying a solution. And so as long as you are providing somebody who is competent to complete the work in an accurate manner, and that they have the level of experience, training, and certification to otherwise sufficiently do that work, I'm going to say you're probably okay. But again, if you see clearly defined labor categories, that should be a warning to you that you need to use somebody who meets those requirements. Now, T&M contracts, again, usually have very clearly defined labor categories, right? The government is buying labor. That's the number one piece of a time and material, or obviously a labor hour contract. So those employees must meet those minimum requirements. Same thing for cost type contracts. Typically what we see are very clearly defined labor categories must meet those minimum requirements. I see some other questions coming in. That's good. We will certainly get to those. If you've got more questions, put them in. We will definitely have some time at the end of the presentation to go back and address questions. All right. I said that I wanted to talk about a labor category matrix, and we do have an example. I'm going to make this available in the follow-up email. So we have a little template. It's nothing fancy, but it's just to kind of show you an example of what the template looks like. You need to do a few things in this matrix. The summary tab that you see here in my image is the top level. So I've got my list of employees. I've got what my internal labor category is for them in one column. And then I've got my contracts listed in other columns. And I go across and I assign that person to the appropriate labor category. Now, I'm going to pause here for a moment and say, related to this, but a little bit of a side note, the development and maintenance of this matrix is often a point of contention inside organizations. My personal feeling is that this is best maintained by somebody in human resources. Sometimes the human resources people say, well, this is a contract management issue, not a human resources issue. Why am I managing this? My reason for saying that the resources people should manage this is because they should have all of the information on your employees in terms of their education, their experience, and certification. They should be maintaining training records. They're maintaining, all the employee files in terms of, how many more years of experience, any of that type of stuff. Regardless, somebody needs to develop and maintain this so that the employees are assigned the appropriate labor category in your timekeeping system. In some of our other webinars, we've talked about automated timekeeping tools. And one of the things that you want to do is to make sure that on a contract by contract basis, employees can only see or use the labor category for which they are qualified. So some of your timekeeping systems, you can go in and you can create labor categories and you can do all this stuff, and they become a drop-down list. And so if you don't go in and do the additional setup, then when the employee goes to log their time, they log in, they choose their job from the drop-down, they go to the next drop-down, and it says, what's your labor category? And all of a sudden, this big list pops up. Well, now you run the risk that they choose the wrong labor category for that contract. Maybe they choose something that they're not qualified to do. Maybe they say, hey, I'm a senior systems engineer. I see senior systems engineer on the list, so I'm going to select that. Again, maybe on that particular contract, they're not qualified. They don't understand that. That's why it's important to develop this matrix, maintain the matrix, and then now, somebody, whether it's in accounting or contract management or who then manages this within your timekeeping and how that's rolled out, again, might be somebody else. But this way, you've got a tool to make sure that you are mapping people to the right labor categories. Now, in the example that you see there, I used me, Suzanne, and Steve. I put what our internal job description or labor categories are. I created some fictitious contracts and went across and said, okay, well, I'm a CPA on contract one because I am a licensed CPA and I would qualify for that labor category. But on contract number two, they don't have a CPA. They have something called an accountant four that I qualify for. And on contract three, I actually qualify for something that's called director of accounting. And again, you'll see a similar concept if you go and look at Suzanne and Steve, that what their internal labor category is doesn't necessarily match up to what their labor category is on these other contracts. Now, the other tabs that I have in my little, and I don't have them necessarily to show you here, but just to talk about, the employees tab there on my matrix is just a way for me to keep track of all the employee names. And then my contract, I've got a tab for each contract. And the intent there is that I would have the list of all of those labor categories from the contracts. So you could either take, the pages and copy paste them in. You could take the text and copy paste them in, whatever you want to do. But now in your matrix tool, you've got one place that I can go and say, okay, I'm mapping these employees. I think this employee maps here. What are the requirements? Okay, I can go click on that tab and I can read, okay, program manager on this contract, has these very specific requirements. And then I know how to map that person into those things. I was thinking about it as I was updating a template. Could you automate this in some way? You potentially could, but it seems like it would be pretty difficult, again, given the so many variances from contract to contract and how these things are identified. All right, our next polling question here, and again, a couple of them close together, but that's the fun in this, is that they are random throughout. So let me launch the third polling question. There we go.
Okay, there my microphone goes. Do you have a labor category matrix for your organization? We've got yes, no, or you're not quite sure.
All right, let's go ahead and close this poll. And again, no right or wrong answer here, just making sure everybody's participating. Let me go back to the slides. All right, related to this, when we start talking about labor categories, one of the questions we often get from clients is, well, how do I figure out how much I should pay somebody? And, where can I find this kind of information, to help me out? So I've got some pointers here for you, but note that a couple of the biggest issues with labor categories when it comes to salary surveys, one is finding complete and reliable data. For example, I know oftentimes when I've gone through this that you'll find information on base salary, but maybe you won't find information on bonus or PTO. Vice versa, sometimes people will present very comprehensive salary total compensation numbers, which can be skewed because if you look at somebody's total compensation, which would be base salary plus bonus plus PTO, plus maybe 401k or other retirement contributions, you end up with what looks like an inflated salary. I'm not saying that the person isn't overall getting that kind of stuff, but you got to remember that if you have somebody who's making a base salary of $100,000 a year, maybe their bonus is $15,000 a year. Maybe their retirement contribution on top of that's another, $10,000. Maybe you have profit sharing, some other stuff. All of a sudden, somebody's total compensation looks like closer to $150,000. But if you don't know what those details are, again, it makes the apples to apples comparison very difficult. And then the other piece is what I mentioned earlier, is that labor categories simply are not standardized. When you are looking at some of these labor or salary survey stuff, what I've typically seen is that it's by title, and you may not have enough details underneath that title to really know, again, what the education, experience, and certification requirements are. So what you may be comparing to what somebody else has could be very, very different. So something to keep in mind. Um, Already mentioned some of these, but right, remember that total compensation does include base salary, bonus, health benefits, paid absences, retirement, profit sharing. Can also be presented as a range, which again makes it difficult because you might see, well, somebody's making 130 to 160,000. Okay, well, what are they really making? And again, is total compensation, is that base salary? So I see Suzanne has popped in here. Would you like to share something, Suzanne? I think you're trying to unmute. Well, I see your lips moving, but I don't hear you. Looks like you're still muted. Let me see if I can unmute you for you. Well, not sure what happened there, as she says. Well, if you want to send me a text, I will share it with everybody. How about we try that? And maybe we'll get her back in just a moment. So some other complicating factors with salary surveys, business size, geographic location, things like intangible benefits, things like remote work, flexible schedule, office atmosphere. So let's talk about some of these things, right? So business size. Now, to be competitive, your small businesses do need to pay, a competitive salary to what some larger businesses pay. So they may not be that far off, but many small businesses simply can't afford to always pay what a larger business pays. And oftentimes employees, like to work for a small business for some of the other benefits, right? So they may be working there, maybe not so much, they might know, hey, I could go to work for the Northrop or the Boeing of the world, and I might make more money working for one of those other companies, but I give up something else, right? I mean, it might mean that I have to move, it might mean culture and other things. Again, geographic location, now I will, so what's interesting, I live in California. The cost of living in California is crazy high, as most people know. Interestingly enough, salaries aren't necessarily commensurate with the cost of living in California. Certainly there are, many positions in California that do pay more than other places, but it is not necessarily in line with the difference in cost of living. For example, I live in San Diego, and I can tell you that the cost of living in San Diego is probably anywhere from 50 to 75%, even 100% more expensive than it is in some other areas of the country. Does that mean that somebody's getting 50 or 75% more money? No, they might be getting 20 or 30% more, but they may not be getting that much more. And then the intangible benefits. There are some other things that, again, will oftentimes attract employees to a position or to a company. And it's things like remote work, flexible schedules. So at Left Brain Professionals, we're 100% remote. We don't have a physical office. We've never had one. We all work from home or travel. We have a lot of freedom and flexibility. My approach to management is that I evaluate, did we get the work done? Did we get it on time? And was the client happy? And if you can do that in 35 hours a week, great. If it takes you 45 hours a week, then that's, part of the issue. If you want to take, my approach is, if you want to take Tuesday afternoon off and go spend it with your mother, or go watch a child's ballet recital, or whatever the case may be, that's fine. I don't care. I don't get into the details of that. Again, as long as you get your work done. Now, if you choose, hey, I'm going to work, Tuesday evening at 9 o'clock to make up because I had some work to catch up, or I'm going to work Saturday morning because I got something that needs to be done Monday morning, then that's part of managing your priorities and time. And then the other thing that we have, and I don't want to say that, some of these things aren't necessarily completely intangible. We also have, related to that, an unlimited PTO policy. Now, I will say that we pay competitive salaries. We don't pay the most salaries. But when you look at the retirement contributions that we make, the freedom and flexibility in how we work, those are factors that employees consider when working for a company like ours versus somebody else. So if you were to compare our salaries to somebody else, it wouldn't necessarily be a one-to-one relationship, an apples to apples relationship. And the other piece that I'll say, and I might get 100 resumes in my email as soon as I say this, part of our compensation is that we have a unique retirement plan. We have a SEP IRA, and I make a 20% contribution from the employer's perspective to employee retirement plans, and that's for full and part-time employees. So again, think of that. Where can you go and get a 20%? Yes, I did say 20% contribution to your retirement. So that, if you were to look at my base salary or Suzanne's base salary, Steve's, could they make more on an hourly basis going somewhere else? Likely, yes. Are they going to get 20% contribution somewhere else to their retirement? Probably not. Okay. A little bit of a long-winded description there, but again, just so you guys can kind of understand some of the issues and looking at these salary surveys. So now you might be saying, okay, Robert, you've talked about this. Where might I find some of this information? Okay. Some employment sites, Indeed, Glassdoor, anything like that is also a possibility. Salary sites and consultants. So there are sites out there called payscale.com, salary.com. I came across this. And I apologize, we've got a typo there, and I need to fix that. It's supposed to say Blue Whale and Society for Human Resource Management. It's actually another line. I apologize, I need to fix that. It's a separate bullet point. So Blue Whale was a company, a consultant company that I came across that does salary survey stuff. I will note that with Payscale and salary.com, you can get some one-off salary information. You can buy subscription plans, which obviously, there are reasons for both of those. If you're looking to hire one new position, maybe you're adding a new position, maybe you need to staff up one or two positions on a new contract, paying the one-off fees of a few $100s each might make sense. If you are maybe staffing up a whole new contract with several new positions, or maybe you want to do an overall evaluation of all of your employees and see what's going on, it might make sense to look at one of the annual type of subscriptions. SHRM, or the Society for Human Resource Management, also offers some information in this area, so you can go there and find, again, some similar surveys. Other great sources are your industry associations. So Steve and Suzanne and I, for example, are all members of NCMA, the National Contract Management Association. One of the things they do every year is that they do a salary survey. And I don't remember the last time. It's like 15 questions, give or take. And they ask where are you located, the size of your company, what your title is, kind of what your rank is in the organization. They ask if you qualify for bonus, do you qualify for profit sharing, and all of these other categories. And then they generate this report that it is helpful, but it's generalized because you're going to see, again, a list of labor categories, but you're going to see ranges of pay. You will see kind of percentages of people who qualify for retirement and how much retirement. The nice thing about the industry association categories is that you're much more likely to find information that's relevant to your industry, obviously, to the types of labor that you're hiring, which can be very helpful. Most of them also do include geography. So again, you can at least try to compare yourself to other people, either within your state or at least within your region. And then another way to potentially look for salary information is what I call indirectly through price. Now, the important thing to note here, what I've got is that you can use GSA's calc tool. This is price information. It's not base labor category or base labor rate information. But you could kind of work backwards a little bit. Again, it's not going to be an exact science, but it does give you an idea. And again, the nice thing about the GSA Calc tool is that you can go in and check for things like years of experience and education and geographic location. So again, it'll at least start to give you a little bit of a range. You know, the flip side is that you might actually use this for the price side. I mean, you couldn't, again, all of this, there is a connection, right? If we're hiring employees and we're selling that service, knowing what we need to pay them, but also knowing what we can bill them out, right? What are people paying for those? And we always have the conversation with our clients that you need to look at those pieces of information together, because sometimes what happens is our clients come to us and they say, hey, we've got these contracts and you know, we already know what we can bill. Sometimes the prime has told us the maximum that they're willing to pay for these. We need to go out and hire people, so we're trying to work backwards. And there's an aspect in there that we don't have time for of understanding your indirect rates, and we can certainly talk about that. We've got several videos on our YouTube channel about that. But if you've got a good calculation of your indirect rates and you know what the market price is and you know what profit you want to be at, you can obviously take that information and work backwards to figure out what you can afford to pay somebody in that labor category. That's an important piece of information. And then obviously you could take that, hey, this is what we can afford to pay, and now compare it to these salary surveys and say, okay, are we going to actually be able to attract and retain these employees? So you go a little bit of both ways on this kind of information. We do have, and I'm going to skip that and come back to that in a moment because I want to get through questions. And Suzanne, I don't know, were you able to get your audio to work? I see you shaking your head, and unfortunately, she's having some technical issues. I'm going to skip.
Is my audio being cooperative? I don't want to interrupt, just to test.
Yes, you are fine. And I'm going to go through our questions that we have out here. All right. Somebody says, how do you deal with lower tier sub or a 1099 worker billed as a labor category in a subcontract, which specifically disallows lower tier? They may be making windfall profit. There's a part of this question that I don't fully understand. So I'm going to answer it this way, is to say that if you have a subcontract, then obviously you need to be flowing down the same requirements to your subs, right? So if you've got defined labor categories, you need to flow down those very specific defined labor categories to your subs. I'm feeling like that's not really answering the question, but I'm not sure that I fully understand. My apologies. Another question here, can the labor categories under the Department of Labor wage determination be considered standard categories? I would say that if you have, again, if those are part of the contract, and we see that on SCA contracts with a defined labor category, then I would say, yes, you're following that. The wage determinations, and I'm drawing a blank at the moment, do they actually have all the definitions of the labor categories? If they do, then I would say, yes, you're okay. For non-standard labor, can't you have the government map to an OPM job classification? I don't know the answer to that question. That is a good question. I don't know that they would do that. Got a follow-up question here. Can they bill at subcontracted rates even if subcontract specifically disallows a lower tier? If the subcontract disallowed a lower tier, then yeah, I would say that you can't bill it. Then yeah, it sounds like you can't bill at those rates. I guess I kind of need to understand a little more about that. So Ashok, if you wanted to email us to discuss, be happy to do that. And our email for anybody, if you've got questions about today's topic or any of the stuff that we talk about in our webinars, it's support@leftbrainpro.com. We are at our 50-minute mark, so I do want to put our last polling question up here. Let me officially launch it. All right, there we go.
Our polling question: how much help do you need with labor categories? A little, a lot, or none? I've got this. Votes are already starting to roll in, so we'll give everybody a chance. Make sure they get their credit. And
Yep. And just a reminder, you do need to answer 3 of the 4 polling questions in order to qualify. Unfortunately, it seems like every webinar I get 1 or 2 people who contact me and they didn't answer the questions. So it's very, very important. I say it out loud multiple times. Make sure you guys hear us. You do need to answer 3 of the 4 polling questions in order to qualify. The system does track it. This is not us. And we do look at those reports and use those reports to generate the CPE certificates. All right. Got a couple more slides to close us out. Do want to say thank you to everybody for participating in today's webinar. You can find us on social media. You can download the presentation at leftbrainpro.com/presentations. You can watch this video as soon as this is over. We will get it uploaded to our YouTube channel. We have over 40 videos now on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are out there. Lots of topics from indirect rates to pricing proposals, incurred cost proposal. All of that information is out there. You can also sign up for upcoming webinars on our website by going to leftbrainpro.com/events. And we do thank you again for participating today and hope that we see you again soon. And I do see one last question here. Somebody said, do we send out CPE certificates? Yes, we will send those out automatically within the next 48 hours. So if you answered 3 of the 4 questions, you will get your CPE certificate. Thanks again. Have a great day, and we hope to see you next month.